Here is the introductory material for Chapter 14. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at I-stem nouns of the third declension, and then also learning a couple new uses of the ablative. A good thing to do would be to have your textbook open as I go through this lecture, because I'm going to be referencing several points in the Wheelock textbook today. So this is Chapter 14. It starts on page 114. Okay, before we get into the actual material though, here is our breakdown for the week's events. So today, of course, we are introducing Chapter 14, and your homework for Tuesday is going to be your traditional homework. So make sure you review the chapter, go over the vocabulary breakdown, which has already been posted on Canvas, and then prepare these sentences for tomorrow, for Tuesday. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, and 9. Tuesday, we'll go over those sentences. Your homework for Tuesday night, of course, will be to prepare for the quiz on Wednesday. Then we'll be doing a very fun 38 Latin story after the quiz on Wednesday, Echo and Handsome Narcissus, which I mentioned briefly the other day. And then Thursday will be set aside completely for review, and Friday is, of course, the exam. All right, so before we get into what the I-stem nouns of the third declension actually are, let's go ahead and do some quick review about how a third declension masculine and feminine and third declension neuter are declined. And then when I'm back in class again on Tuesday, we'll go ahead and fill out this entire chart in preparation for the exam to see how you guys are remembering the endings. But for right now, let's just focus on third declension. So remember that your nominative is a little funky, so I'm just going to put a star right there. Same for neuter, and of course neuter accusative is going to be the same as the nominative. Vocatives, of course, are going to be the same as their nominatives. But now let's go ahead and look at the masculine and feminine endings. So the genitive is an IS, the dative is a long I, and this should all be review. Accusative is an EM, and then your ablative is an E. In the plural, remember you get that ace business in both the nominative, the accusative, and the vocative. Also important, especially for this chapter, UM in the genitive. Dative is that ibis, like the omnibus, from which we get our word bus from. We talked about that in class the other day. Now let's make sure we remember our neuter. Remember, neuter is the same here, and same here. The only place it is different is in the nominative, accusative, and vocative, which will all be the same. And then looking at our plural side, it ends in an A here, so corpora, for example. Same here, going to be an A like the nominative. Same here, and of course an A like the nominative and accusative. All right, so this is your third declension endings. If this is not ringing a bell, please make sure you do some review before you continue in this lecture, because it's vital that you remember how third declension works before you learn what the I-stem nouns of the third declension are. Especially important for this chapter is remembering the right here. Remembering the neuter E right here. And then also your A that you see in the nominative, accusative, and vocative in the neuter. And this will make sense in just a second. But these are the most important forms to remember. That the neuter has an E in the ablative singular. That both of them have a UM in the genitive plural. And that in the nominative, accusative, and vocative, the neuter just has an A. All right, so let's go ahead and actually start looking at what I-stem nouns are. And once again, as I said, please have your Wheelock textbook open, because I'm going to be referring a lot to it as we go along here. And chapter 14 begins on page 114, so I'm quite serious about you pulling that out. So I-stem nouns of the third declension. So they are declined the exact same way as any third declension noun is declined, except in a few different places. And we'll talk about how to identify these I-stems in just a second. But first, let's talk about where they are different. So the first thing is that in the masculine and the feminine, the only place that it's going to be different is in the genitive plural, where instead of having the um that you traditionally have in third declension, they have an ium. And you can see this on page 114 of the textbook. So look underneath kiwis, for example, where you have kiwis, kiwi, kiwem, kiwe, just like you have regs, regis, regi, regum, rega. But then in the plural, you have reges and kiwes, just like you would expect. But instead of doing regum kiwum, like you would expect to see, kiwis is an I stem noun, and instead it has an ium genitive ending, kiwium. And then after that, it follows the exact same pattern. Regibus, kiwibus, reges, kiwes, regibus, kiwibus. So the only place that it's different is in that genitive plural ium. Neuter is just a little bit different, and once again, I hope that you have your textbook open as we go through this. But there are a couple of places that the neuter differs, and the first place is that in the ablative singular, it is going to have an I instead of an E, and that's actually a long I. Then in the nominative, accusative, and vocative plural, it's going to have an IA, sorry, that's an A there. And then finally, also in the genitive plural, it's going to have an IUM. So once again, look at your textbook, page 114, and let's go ahead and look at maris right there. It means see. It is neuter. And this is an I stem neuter third declension noun. So you've got the mara, maris, mari, mara, which is completely normal, the same in the nominative and the accusative, ius in the genitive, long I in the dative. But then look at that ablative form. So where we should have mara, like we have rega, we actually have mari with a long I right there. Now let's look in the plural. Instead of having mara, like we would have, for example, corpora, instead we have an IA, so Maria. And then, of course, we have our Marium, which is your genitive plural. And then the ibis and the ibis is the same, but then in the accusative, once again, you have an IA. So that's how the differences are for neuter, and it's far more pronounced than the masculine and feminine, so remember that. So one more time, masculine and feminine, the only place it is different is the genitive plural, where you'll have an IUM. In the neuter, they'll be different in the ablative singular, where you will have an I instead of an E. Nominative, accusative, vocative, plural, where you will have an IA instead of just an A. And then, just like masculine and feminine, genitive plural will be an IUM. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at page 115 for the identifying masculine and feminine I stem nouns. So page 115, make sure you're there. So with the masculine and feminine, there are two different types of nouns that qualify to be I stem nouns of the third declension as opposed to just third declension. The first thing is a word called parasyllabic. Parasyllabic words, okay? And what this means, if you break it up etymologically, and this is from Greek words, but the para right here means equal, and syllabic, as I bet you guys can guess, is syllable. So these are words that have equal syllables. So for example, look at page 115. The way that this works is that, and I'm just going to read this definition right here, most masculine and feminine nouns that have a nominative singular in IS or ES, and the same number of syllables in both the nominative and the genitive, and hence they are called parasyllabic, are going to be I stems. So for example, hostis, masculine. So once again, nominative is ending in an IS or an ES, and you have the exact same number of syllables in both of these, the nominative and the genitive form. So for example, hostis, 2 syllables, hostis, 2 syllables. Looking at page 115, we also have nawis, nawis, feminine, meaning ship. And then the next one after that, and I'm going to write this one down, is moles, molus, and I'm writing this one down because as you can see, it doesn't mean that it has to have the exact same spelling for each one. Here you have an ES ending instead, and then an IS in the genitive. But regardless, you have a nominative that ends in IS or ES, and there's the same number of syllables in each of the words. So moles, molus. So this is also going to be I stem. And so remember, with your masculine and feminine, all this means is that your genitive plural is going to be IUM instead of UM. The second way that this often signifies an I stem noun, once again on page 115, number 2, it says masculine and chiefly feminine nouns with a nominative singular in S or X, which have a base ending in 2 consonants. Most, like the following, have monosyllabic nominatives. So I know that sounds a little complicated, but just remember that the nominative singular ends in an S or an X, and the base ends in 2 consonants. So let's look at a couple of examples then. So you have ars, that is an A, there we go. Artis, and it's feminine. So here you have a nominative that ended in S, and it's also monosyllabic. Monosyllabic means it's 1 syllable, so ars. And then the base, remember to find the base, you cut off the IS genitive ending, has 2 consonants, R and T. Let's look at another example. So Danes, dentis, which means a tooth, masculine. Let's look at it again. Nominative ends in an S, it is monosyllabic, and the base ends in 2 consonants, N, T. Let's just look at one last one and then we'll call it good here. Nox, noctis, feminine, it means night. So once again, you have an X, because remember you can do an S or an X. And also remember that the X is typically, just means that a consonant has run into S and thus changed into an X. So for example, a C and an S bumped into each other will change into an X. But anyway, so it ends in an X. It is monosyllabic, nox. And its base, noct, ends in 2 consonants. And so all 3 of these words, and also herbs, herbis, as it shows in the chapter on page 115, all of these are going to be I stem, masculine and feminine nouns. And one more time, just as a reminder, that only difference from third declension nouns is that it's going to have an IUM in the genitive plural. Lastly, let's look at the neuter. So this is under neuter I stems on page 115, number 3, it says right there. So if the nominative singular ends in all, R, or E, it will have the I in the ablative singular, the IUM in the genitive plural, and also the IA in the nominative, accusative, and vocative plural like we discussed. So remember, once again, the neuter I stems are a lot more involved than your masculine and feminine I stems. But anyway, some examples that it has listed right here is animal. So see the AL right there? That signifies that this is indeed going to be an I stem noun. So animal, animalis, I'm not going to write the whole thing out, neuter. The other one is example we have right here is exemplar, exemplaris, neuter. Once again, that's an example of ending in AR. And then lastly, and this is probably the most common that you'll see, is mare, maris. Neuter, it means sea. And here you see the E and the E, so that's an example of the E. So once again, remember the differences is the ablative singular will be an I, the nominative, accusative, and vocative plural will be an IA, and the genitive plural will be an IUM. And these are for neuter nouns that end in AL, AR, or E in the nominative singular. So the next thing that we need to learn for this chapter is the irregular noun wis wis, and this is back on page 114 or at the bottom of page 115. And this word is quite interesting, actually. It has several irregularities to it. The first thing to note is wis. And then as you can see in the Wheelock right here, they have the second wis in parentheses. And they also have this dative right here in parentheses. Now what that means is that we actually have no extant examples of the genitive and dative of this form. So we think it's going to be a wis and a we, but we don't actually know because we have no examples of it in the Latin literature that has come down to us. But anyways, going on, the accusative is the other important one to know. And this one we actually do have examples of. It's whim. And if anybody has ever heard of the phrase vim and vigor in English, vim and vigor, that vim is our whim right here. So that's where we get the phrase vim and vigor. And then the ablative, which once again we do have examples of, is we. And of course the vocative is just going to be wis. Nothing abnormal about that. The plural is where it gets a little bit funkier. So in the plural it is we race. So you can see the base changes to this weir thing right here. And this is indeed I stem because it's the parasyllabic wis wis. So here we have wearium, see the I right there. We also have that long I in the ablative I should have mentioned that typically you only see in the neuter. So this is just an irregular word all over the place. Then you do have your normal wearibus. The accusative is the same as your nominative, wearace. Your ablative is the same as your dative. And your vocative is going to be the same as your nominative and accusative right there. So this is how your wis wis is formed. It is feminine. And it's also important that the singular means something like force or violence, something like that. Whereas in the plural, it typically is translated as strength. So this is one of those examples where you have a different definition in the singular and the plural. So just remember that. And you can also look at your vocab list. Let's look at that real quick, actually. That's on page 118. You can see wis in the singular is force, power, violence, and in the plural, it is strength. We have quite a few derivatives from this, like violent, someone who is full of force and power and violence. Or like we talked about before, the phrase vim and vigor. But anyways, going back to the bottom of page 115, be very, very, very careful that you do not confuse this with the word weary, masculine from the second declension masculine, okay? Because here you also see the VIR base, but it's different from the plural because this one right here, for wis wis, you have third declension I stem endings, whereas here with weary, you're going to see second declension masculine endings. So if you're confused about that, just read the bottom of page 115 where Wheelock lists out quite helpfully for you all of the different derivatives that might be confusing, or sorry, not derivatives, but the different words that might be a little confusing for you. All right, so that is the end of Wees Wees. The last thing that we talk about in this chapter are a couple of new forms of the ablatives. So, of course, as always, you still have ablatives like day that takes the ablative, pro takes the ablative, you have one like propter that takes the accusative, or excuse me, we're just doing ablatives right now, so just ignore that. But day, pro, ex, a couple others, they all take the ablative. And when I underline a word like de patria, from the city, or sorry, the fatherland, patria is going to be ablative because it's the object of the preposition de. Now, though, we are going to be learning a couple other uses, okay? And let's go ahead and start with this second one right here, where it does come with a preposition. And this is on page 116 to 117. So at the middle / the end of page 116, it says ablatives of accompaniment and manner right there. So when you have the preposition cum, and it takes the ablative, like we've already learned, there are two different reasons for the cum plus the ablative form. Now, one of them you've already learned, so this isn't going to be too tricky. The first one is accompaniment. So if I say that I am going to the store cum amico with my friend, then that amico is going to be ablative because it is accompaniment. Okay? Now the second use of cum plus the ablative is what is called manner. And I direct you now to page 116 to 117 of the textbook, where right here, so let's look at the first example, cum amicis venerunt, they came with friends. So they are traveling along with their friends. So here the amicis is going to be an ablative of accompaniment. Now let's look at the second example then. Cum celeritate venerunt. They came, venerunt, cum celeritate, with speed, with haste. That's what celeritas means. So here they are not coming arm in arm with speed, but rather it describes the manner in which they are traveling. They were coming with haste. They were coming speedily. So in this case, if I were to underline celeritate and ask you what case is it and why, you would tell me it is ablative because of manner, okay? So that's how the ablative of manner works, and we'll talk about this again on Tuesday when I'm actually there to show you some more examples. Well, let's look at the last two right here. Fecit id cum eis. So he did it, id, cum eis, with them. He did it right alongside them. So that eis right there is an ablative of accompaniment. Whereas id cum virtute fecit, he did it with virtue. He did it courageously, virtuously. The virtute right there is going to be an ablative of manner. So once again, this is page 116. It has a really good description of how the manner works. But those are the two uses of cum that you have to know. So no longer can you just say cum takes an ablative because it is object of the preposition. You have to tell me either accompaniment or manner. So going back up here to when there is no preposition. So when you just have a floating ablative, it's not tied to a preposition like de or cum or pro or anything like that, or sine, then it is what we call an ablative of means, okay? And this is a very common form in Latin, so I'm going to circle it and put a star, okay? So let's look at the examples on page 116. And what this means is that if I wanted to say in Latin, I chop down a tree with an axe, I am chopping down the tree by means of an axe, that axe is going to be in the ablative, okay? So let's look at the examples right here. The first one is literos stylo scripsit He wrote, scripsit, the letter, literos, stillo. So see, stillo right there is definitely in the ablative with that O ending from second declension. And so that is going to be an ablative of means. He wrote the letter by means of his pencil. So he wrote the letter with a pencil. Let's look at this second example. Kiues pecunia vicet. So he conquered, vicet, the citizens, kiues, pecunia, by means of money or with money or by money, something like that. So that's the way in which he conquered them. He conquered the citizens by means of money. And lastly, id meis oculis vidi. Vidi, I saw, id, it, by means of my eyes, meis oculi. So I saw it with my eyes. That is the instrument through which you saw things. So once again, this is called the ablative of means or instrument, and that is on page 116 if you want to read a better description of it. And that is the end of the chapter. So it's really not a difficult chapter. Just those few little differences for the I stem nouns of the third declension, and then those two new uses of the ablative case. And I'll be answering any questions that you have on Tuesday at the start of class. You can also email me. I will try to get reply as quickly as I can. And also make sure once again that you prepare the sentences for Tuesday.